name's Sophie Foster, and welcome to Can We Talk About That, the local Oxford County podcast where we break down gender-based violence, what it looks like in our everyday lives, and what we can do about it. Before we get into today's conversation, just a quick heads up that we are going to be talking about topics like violence, trauma, and abuse, as well as stalking and harassment. So please just take care of yourself while you're listening. We know that sometimes things can come up that are maybe stressful or maybe trigger things that have happened to you in the past. So if you're listening and you need to take a break, please feel free to do so. You can always come back to this episode a little bit later. If you're listening and you feel like you'd like some support, please feel free to call the DASO crisis line. The toll-free number is 1-800-265-1938. It is free, confidential, and it's open 24/7. Just to note that we did have some complications with the cameras and microphones in recording this episode, and we hope that you still enjoy the show. For today's episode, I'm sitting down with Tracey Marshall to talk more about risk assessment and how we know when the situation or relationship is getting dangerous. So to start our episode, can you tell us a little bit more about how you fit within this gender-based violence field?
Yeah, it's been my passion. I started as a police officer in Scarborough. I went to a lot of calls with intimate partner violence and went to a lot of the same calls. So realized that we needed to do a little bit more in the community to try to really stop this as early as possible so that cycle gets interrupted. So I started learning a little bit about violence risk assessment, and I was fortunate enough to become part of the OPP Behavioral Sciences section understudy program. I went to Aurelia for a year and learned how to do violence risk assessment there, which was just an incredible opportunity. And now I've left policing and I have my own company of one person. And so I continue to teach on intimate partner violence risk assessment tools and all different kinds of violence risk assessment. So I think over the years, since 1980s, we've had 70s and 80s, we started to learn about violence risk assessment more scientifically. It used to be a little bit of guesswork, which isn't really appropriate. Right. And especially when we're thinking about violence for, the risk of future violence. So that's really my passion, is really understanding how we can look at risk, understand what risk looks like, and more importantly, manage the risk. So, we can say threat assessment, risk assessment, that's very important. But if we don't have the management piece in there, we're not mitigating the risk for our victims. So it's a passion of mine, and I continue to do it now, even in my retirement.
Yeah, which is awesome. We need more of this. And I think just Oxford County in general is trying to go more prevention than reaction. So you've been a key component to that in my personal experience here. So to start off the topic, maybe we could touch on, you talked about it a little bit there, but what does risk assessment actually mean? And what does it look like in our context?
It can take many forms, and historically it started with, I would say, Ellen Pence, who did the power and control wheel and started to think about how do we educate others about what violence looks like. In Ontario, the ODARA was developed, which is an actuarial tool, which is a risk predictive tool, which is statistically, scientifically supported, and that's what our police officers are using in Ontario now. And along with the actuarial stream came something called structured professional judgment. Structured professional judgment takes the expertise from the assessor and marries it with science. So you are able to take unique circumstances about the family you're assessing and incorporate that into your risk assessment as well. So dynamic risk factors versus static risk factors. So when you think about doing a checklist, so we have the ODARA, which is an actuarial tool, and we have the danger assessment by Dr. Jackie Campbell, which is a checklist, which is great as long as we understand that we're only capturing static risk factors, so things that have already happened, things that are not really changeable, like past drug use problems or past criminality, past incarceration, things that have already happened. So that's important, but when we're thinking about mitigating risk in the moment for, I use the terminology victim, for somebody who I believe might be at risk of future harm, if we're thinking about mitigating risk for a woman with kids, we need to know if her ex-partner is driving around her home. That's a dynamic risk factor. We need to know if he has just relapsed. He could have been, not using substances for years. If he's just relapsed, that's a dynamic risk factor. If he's just lost his job, or he's, all of these things that are really active that we can't capture just using a checklist. So the checklists are helpful, but the tool that I advocate, the Be Safer, is part of a process called structured professional judgment. And that allows us to think about dynamic risk factors, but also things that are happening right now that might really be relevant to risk that make us concerned that something is escalating now. When we're thinking about intimate partner homicide, which is, the absolute worst case scenario, but also the escalation from, we say low risk doesn't mean no risk. So while we're thinking about risk at all, it's helpful to mitigate risk at any level. So we shouldn't really wait till we're trying to prevent homicide. But that's what we always need to think in our minds, is if we have good process in place for every case that we're looking at, we manage each case in a similar fashion. We identify which risk is higher and mitigate. We're helping that cycle of violence all along from the relatively lower cases up to the high-risk cases in a way that I think is meaningful, and it's easily replicable with your staff, with the police, with the hospital, with CAS, with Humane Society, with income support, with all of the different community service agencies. If we're all thinking about risk in the same way and communicating that risk, which is another very important piece of risk management, then it's only going to help our clients or our victims or survivors and their children. And the other piece to that is that we're helping the offender. If the offender isn't escalating, if the offender is getting the support that they need because of risk factors that we've identified, for example, employment, housing, substance use, management, mental health supports if needed, the risk for the offender is lower, and so the risk to our victim is lower. So leaving an offender, and I say offender, a potential repeat intimate partner violence offender, leaving that offender in the community on conditions, court conditions, without any support is daft, because we're really asking that person to be their own control, and that doesn't seem to be working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're kind of like leaving them out. Hopefully you don't do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
But with these kind of things like you're talking about, the hope, I think, in Oxford County is that everyone is using the same checklist, if not more than a checklist, to understand, is this couple or is this person who's used violence in the past going to continue to escalate, and are we going to have another domestic issue where the police are called again?
Yeah.
So instead of having the police called over and over and over again, the hope is that we can assess and act faster.
Yeah.
So maybe can you tell us a little bit about the things that are on, you mentioned Be Safer, things that tell you, okay, the risk is going up.
So we know at separation that that's a really difficult time. We know that some relationships may involve violence throughout the relationship, but upon separation we might see a sudden surge, an escalation in the type of violence, the frequency, the risk for lethality. So we want to see a change if there's a change in violence. Because if you can control someone without ever being violent for 30 years, there's no need for escalation. But once that partner says, I want to leave the relationship, we might see that violence escalating, different kinds of violence, different types of control. We always are concerned about strangulation. I think that was something that when I first started policing was not really understood. And we know now through research that there's a very strong link between high risk and strangulation of the intimate partner as a predictor of future domestic homicide. So even if you think about the Renfrew Recommendations, Carol Culleton was strangled by Basil previously, and then that was cause of death at the inquest. So we need to think about that, those kind of behaviors. So strangulation is something that I think we never asked in policing. So raising the awareness for the imminent harm and the need for immediate physical attention by a physician and by our domestic violence sexual assault care nurses. I think the evidence gathering around strangulation is important as well. So not that the physical health isn't the only or isn't important, but it also helps our victims, our survivors, if we get better evidence. So we're not just relying on their story, we're relying on forensic evidence, which for strangulation, we talk about choking. Choking is something you do on a hot dog, but that's kind of a common terminology that we use. So
right.
Choking and strangulation, you might hear either terminology, but the proper term is strangulation, where there's either a ligature strangulation, manual with the hand, maybe something, a scarf, the ligature strangulation, or suffocation, but something that's restricting oxygen or blood to the woman's brain. And we only get physical injuries from strangulation maybe half of the time. And so just to look at her, you'd say, well, she's fine. But you can have broken blood vessels at the back of the eye that can only be seen at the hospital by the forensic care nurse, who is able to photograph that and document that and then support the statement of the victim. So I think, many times you'll hear maybe from the police, oh, it's a he said, she said. And the more evidence that we can gather. So the importance of getting a medical examination for any strangulation is important because they can actually have a stroke up to 72 hours after the strangulation. And we wouldn't know that without that help. So I think that's the idea of strangulation being recognized as a high risk factor is important, but also then following that up with proper medical attention. And if he can do it to mom, he can do it to the kids too. So we need to exclude that for the babes. So recent separation, strangulation, mental health problems are, there are a few types of mental health problems that are relevant to risk, but not all mental health problems are related to violence. So we need to make sure that we know what we're looking at. Same with substance use problems. Doesn't necessarily mean that that will relate to violence. But if in this particular family it has in the past,
right,
we would look at that as a risk factor. And for some people it can be one risk factor, and that's why the checklist is kind of maybe helpful for an average application over maybe 100 people, but for one specific family it might not at all flag for risk because the risk might be unusual. So risk might show up in someone who's had a motorcycle accident and has had brain damage and is acting violently now where they were never violent before. So they've never been to jail before, they don't use substances, they don't have mental health problems, other than now they have a new impulse control injury with their brain. So that's one risk factor. And we have to really think about risk individualized to the person rather than statistically what is this person's chance in relation to the rest of the population.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we like the structured professional judgment style. And it also helps individualize management strategies. It's important to consider culture. And so to go back to your question around escalation, what are we looking for? If in, a specific culture that has a belief system that violence is okay to keep your partner in line, then that would mean that the person who is violent isn't necessarily going to be controlled by the court system, for example, because they have this attitude of acceptance of violence. So not everybody from a certain place or a certain belief system would hold those values, but we have to consider if in this family dad believes that he has control and ownership over mom,
Mm-hmm.
or mom believes I can't leave him. If I leave him, my whole family will disown me. So when we're thinking about the risk of violence being present, also how well are we able to mitigate it? So recent separation, violent attitudes, so that mindset of the offender thinking violence is okay, makes us concerned. Substance use problems, employment problems, where he's maybe just recently lost a job. And we think there, well, how much does he care if he lost his job? So if you have a high-ranking staff in a hospital who is very much committed to his status and he loses his job, that might play a role in escalation of risk, because I've lost my partner, I've lost my job, versus someone who doesn't really mind if they lose their job.
Right.
Right? So some people are like, I'm on paid leave now, or I've been fired, and they're like, that's okay, I don't mind anyway.
Yeah.
So it's really, that's how we individualize it, which I think is it makes sense. It's very, it makes common sense that those things should be considered, not just what it is, but how
Mm-hmm.
it impacts that person specifically.
Right, and capturing that human element in it.
Yeah.
Because, you can, like, checklists for humans are pretty much impossible.
Yeah, and human behavior, as you know, is, it's very unpredictable at times.
Mm-hmm. It's complicated.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in your job now, with your own company, offering these trainings, who in your dream world will be using, let's say, the Be Safer assessment? And who are you hoping has the ability to kind of look at risk in the way that you're talking about?
Everybody.
Okay.
Because the nice thing about the Be Safer has been developed for frontline service providers. It's kind of a abbreviated version of the SARA. So that's a spousal assault risk assessment. That's the more in-depth version that you would see entered into a court proceeding, for example, by a threat assessment specialist. And the information that feeds the threat assessment knowledge can go right from your intake interview all the way up through the court system to sentencing, and then that same process can be used to determine by parole if that person is now less of a risk than they were when they were incarcerated. So the process, that's why I really believe it's the right process to use, can be used by neighbors. So, I know you had Tim Kelly here, who really was the founder of the Neighbors, Friends and Families campaign, and the importance of everyone understanding what risk looks like and knowing what to do when they identify it. So risk can show up, injuries can be seen by a hairdresser that might be hidden behind the hairline, or a dentist that sees someone coming back for repeated, dental care where they're not so sure that it was a door in the face. Teachers in school, professors at college, university, everyone really needs to have those eyes and ears out. And if we're all looking at the same risk factors, so in the Be Safer, there are 15 areas only to consider. So it's not very cumbersome. It's just a matter of, if you're talking about risk with someone who's maybe from child protection and you're each looking at it using two different tools, it doesn't help. It slows down your process, it slows down the child protection process. The information isn't going to be as powerful because it's going to be different. And ultimately it's the victim and her kids that are struggling and suffering because we don't have a set of understandings around what risk looks like. So I think it's our responsibility to start talking about risk using the same tool, knowing that that can be interpreted through the court system all the way through. So it's not like you can only use it here or here or here. You can use this process everywhere.
Mm-hmm. So everyone in a dream world should be assessing around them, like couples around them, family members, friends, everybody.
Yeah.
And then from there, if everyone's assessing and if everyone's using kind of the same ways to assess, the dream world is that will catch more of these situations going on in our community.
Yeah, because what we're doing right now isn't working.
No. Well, it just keeps getting worse.
It does. And I started in policing I started as a civilian in 1987 and as a police officer in 1989. That's a long time ago. And we haven't put a dent into the homicide rate for victims of intimate partner homicide. So for all the money, for all the loss, the grief, the tragedy, kids growing up without their parents, I don't think we're doing very well. So that has to change. And I feel like if we have implemented all of the recommendations of the inquest over the years, and we still haven't put a dent in the homicide rate, then we really need to go back and think, okay, we're not getting anywhere. But we have not yet implemented the recommendations from homicides 30 years ago. So we have May Isles, we have Hadley, and now we have Basil Boretsky with the Renfrew Recommendations. If we haven't implemented all of those, shame on us. And why are we wondering why women are still dying? Mm-hmm. The answers are in those recommendations. So as a community, we need to get together and say, enough of our individualized funding, because everyone has to scramble for funding. One agency might get it, and that means the other one doesn't. But if we're all working together, I know that there's power in information. This process asks for all agencies who have information about case A to share the information if she's at risk of being seriously injured or killed. And serious injury isn't just physical injury, right? PTSD is very, very, very damaging. And so psychological harm is considered harm. So we know from information packages that have come out from the Privacy Commissioner of Ontario that we can share information. So I think that fear has to be put to rest. And agencies need to really think like, okay, how do we go about sharing information to really get the full story of what's happening with this family, anchored in those 15 risk factors, because that also means you can have a quick meeting, because I think we're wasting a lot of time on meetings where people are coming with ideas, you leave after, I'm going to say 2 hours, and nothing gets done. So when we're thinking about using the Be Safer, we have 15 risk factors to think about, and you can really go through it, boom, 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 boom. Pull information from each agency related to each risk factor and move forward into risk management. So it's a way, I think, to capture everybody's information in as quickly and as efficiently a way as possible. Also realizing that good risk assessment isn't going to take 2 minutes or 5 minutes. How long should a good risk assessment take? It should take as long as it takes to do a good risk assessment. Because if we don't do a good one now, we're going to be doing another one and another and another. So I think front end loading these cases is beneficial to prevent future harm, to help kids grow up in a violence-free home. And by spending a little bit more time at the beginning, really understanding what's going on with that family, I think will help prevent them from that cycle, hopefully. And I also encourage, our criminal justice system to do the same, to really understand the harm that's happening. This isn't just a minor offense. The more information we can provide to the courts about what's happening with this family, maybe the better decisions they'll be able to make as well about the risk that's potentially there.
Yeah, well, and just having, like you said, front loading, when we have cases that maybe do end in a homicide or a murder, then how much energy and time we're putting into that reaction of that, as opposed to what we could have done, a month, 2 months, a year before.
Yeah.
So just thinking about using the Be Safer and just the general public even thinking about how to risk assess. Let's say someone at the hospital does the Be Safer and they say, okay, no, this family is very high risk and I'm worried about them. What's your hope? Where does it go from there?
So I'm hoping that the hospital staff would already be part of a known group of people who have training, and they can call a case management meeting. So if there's somebody that's presented with serious injuries and maybe they've just separated from their partner and their partner's going to come after them, that's their fear, then we need to engage law enforcement, we need to engage maybe child protection, whichever services this person is would be of assistance to this person. Could be a Zoom call. We do Zoom calls all the time. To have a high-risk committee meeting every other Tuesday is not going to help that person. That person needs help right now. And so I really think that we need to be nimble. We need to have phone numbers accessible of all community agencies and say, I'm going to call Sophie, I'm going to call Tracey, I'm going to call Julia, I'm going to call Ben, I'm going to call Giselle, I'm going to call Fatima, these are the people that I know from the agencies because we've already developed relationships with them. And they are on the ball. We will have a quick discussion, focused discussion about risk, and we'll come out with some action items that each one of us will do so that no one agency is overwhelmed. And I believe that can happen if we all work together. I don't think that's really too weird. I think we should be doing that. I think that's common sense. And I really believe that our community thinks we're already doing that.
Okay. Yeah.
I would like to meet their expectations.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me too. Well, and we're working towards that.
Yeah.
And a huge thing is having you come in and teach Be Safer and how to do these risk assessments and getting all of Oxford County on the same page.
Yeah.
That's the long-term goal.
Streamline the process.
Yeah, well, and I liked the word you use, nimble. We do. You have to act fast.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, sometimes there's moments that happen where we have to act fast, but because we don't have a system set up, it makes it harder.
You're now creating the process as you go along, which, again, if you have somebody who's at risk, they need us to be
we don't have time for that.
Now.
Yeah,
No.
we just don't have time to create it as we go. So, we know that using this, we know that working ahead of time not only prevents femicide, but also serious harm, PTSD, all these things that can affect long term. So right now you'd say, Oxford County, we're building that system up. I think we're getting there.
Yeah.
But there's definitely some gaps. Is there any gaps that you know of, right off the hop, that you're like, we need to fix these gaps?
Yeah, I think that the kind of central list of all of the agencies in Oxford County, there are agencies that are getting funding to do this little piece that we might not know about. Or, if you're thinking like, well, what agency would be great for counseling 14-year-old boys in Oxford County? I don't know, but I'd like to have a list of all of those because that might be important, right? In our management strategies, we want to support the health of the whole family. So I think that's important is actually knowing what's available and who's supposed to be doing what. I also think holding partners accountable if they don't do it is very important. If a partner is getting funded to do A, B, and C and they're only doing A and B, that needs to be made known to them in an official way. I don't have time for people who say, oh, we don't do that, or, well, it says here that you do. So either you change your mandate or you start doing this. So I feel like it's important that we know what people get funded to do, make sure that they're doing it. For example, probation and parole is supposed to be doing violence risk assessment in some capacity and informing victims of risk. Is that happening? I don't know. It should be, and if it's not, why not? We have recommendations from the Death Review Committee every year that aren't mandatory implementation. So we have so many good recommendations that is one of them is good risk assessment, state-of-the-art risk, state-of-the-science risk assessment, like the most up-to-date understanding of risk that we can possibly get, knowing it's going to be imperfect because people surprise us all the time. So it's not about risk prediction, but just being able to develop relationships and trust between community service partners, which I think is lacking. And building friendships. So if I have a victim and they are saying, well, I don't know what is available for me in Woodstock as far as either shelter or second stage housing, I would say, well, I have a good friend and I can introduce you and I know that they'll take care of you. That's the relationship we need to build interagency. Because if we don't trust ourselves, why would our client or our victim tell us everything about everything if we're like, well, we don't deal with the police, or we don't deal with CAS, or we don't deal with whatever, insert agency here. That's our own bias, and we have to get rid of that and make the system work for us. Make the system that's being funded do, and for example, if I call the police and they drop the ball, I must go back and make that issue known to the supervisor, else how will they ever learn? We have to help each other get better, and that's just an example. But, the wheels are going to fall off with any agency at any time, but I think we have to gently, but forcefully, I guess that's two different things, professionally, but clearly make it known that this was not compliant with the there are mandatory, there are rules around how we investigate and manage domestic violence cases. And if that isn't happening, we can't just say, oh, I'm not phoning them again, because that's not helping this victim or the next one. We really have to make the system work, and in doing so, educate people that we're not going to accept, any service that's not at 100%, because we're talking about life and death. And we have to make sure that we're all doing it together. So that's more difficult, is to create those connections, but it doesn't mean that it's not absolutely essential that we do that.
And it's possible. We're doing it. We're doing it.
Yeah. And I think your community is very strong in getting that mindset. And then you pull others along with you that might be hesitant, but then they're going to look silly if they say, oh, well, we don't go to those meetings or we don't do that. Well, who are you really helping then? If you're really helping the victim, you'll drop all of that and join this team that's really strong and getting stronger every day. So it's hard work.
It is hard work.
But it's important.
It's so important, and it's possible.
It is.
So is that maybe what gives you hope when it comes to kind of working on prevention and working on risk assessment? What would you say gives you hope to kind of wrap up our episode?
The enthusiasm of the people who I've met in our communities. There are thousands of people who have given years of their lives to this work that don't get the recognition that they should. People who are maybe not in, quote, leadership positions in their agency, but are the leaders that are pushing for change. Change is very slow in a corporation or in a large company, and I think I have seen so many people that are saying, that's not acceptable, what can I do as an individual? And just that this is not work that people get a lot of money to do. People are doing it because they care, and that's really what we need to do is recognize those people for they have saved lives. We only hear about it in the paper when things go terribly wrong, and we don't know about the lives that have been saved. So that level of it's hope, and we can't not have hope for the future. We have to keep doing this work and do it better because we can together.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. And I hope we get there too.
We have to.
We will, and we have to.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming on this episode and giving us a better idea of risk assessment and what it looks like and kind of where we're at in our community too.
Yeah, thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Can We Talk About That? A big thank you to Tracey Marshall for coming on our show and sharing her insights. If anything in this conversation maybe brought something up for you that you'd like help working through, please feel free to call the DASO crisis line. The toll-free number is 1-800-265-1938. It is free, it's confidential, and it is open 24/7. We'll be back with more conversations that help us to break down gender-based violence in our everyday lives. We'll see you on our next episode.